All right, hello everybody out there, and welcome to this HackSurfer Hangout, the hidden cybercrime menace, vendors, third parties, and the supply chain. Today we're going to be obviously talking about cybercrime and supply chain. It's kind of a big issue we see a lot of times in the news over the last couple months. We have three panelists with us today. The first is Jason Polancich. He's the founder of SurfWatch Labs. Then we have Brian Foster, the CTO of Dambala, and Wayne Wheelies, the founder and CEO of Release to Innovations. And I'm Jeff Peters. I'm the editor over at HackSurfer.com. So I guess we'll just get right into it. Well, first, this is an open Q&A, so if you're watching on Google and you do have any questions, we already see we got a couple coming in. You can go ahead and post your questions right here, and we'll try to get to them before the show's over. But I guess just to get started, maybe we'll start with Jason. I guess in the news you hear a lot about supply chain cybercrime, and it's kind of been a big topic lately, but maybe can you just sort of, I guess, help define, what is supply chain cybercrime for those who don't know?
Yeah, so just real quick, simple definition is pretty much every business has partners and suppliers that they use to drive their own businesses. So for example, in the healthcare sector, they have payroll processors, insurance claims filers, so on and so forth. Or, to pick the defense sector, big defense integrators like Lockheed, Boeing, things like that as an example, they often have thousands of suppliers, whether they build airplane parts, wheels or gears or things like that, all the way to subcontractors who help them do software development, so on and so forth. So pretty much the easiest definition is that, we have all of these, we have companies have other companies in their supply chain, they have partners that they buy stuff from and then integrate with their own stuff and resell. They have partners that have access, for example, in the domain we're talking about. These partners all have access to their networks to varying degrees, to their software and systems, and oftentimes cause downstream cybercrime activity, cyber attacks, breaches, hits, things like that. So that's the simplest way to describe it.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering maybe if we could get a little bit of context around here. Maybe Brian, you could take this one. I guess at least for me, over the last couple of months, I've been reading a lot about supply chain cybercrime. I'm kind of new to the field, so to me, I'm just kind of wondering if you'd agree that it's something that's becoming more of an issue, or if it's something that's sort of always been there. If you could just kind of give us some context on that.
Yeah, and I would say actually it's been around for a while. Yeah, I've been in this industry now for over 20 years, and I remember back 10 years ago, the issue is not just the laptops that you own, but the ones that are attaching to your network, or the ones that are you've opened up your network to pass on business information, etc. And so I don't think this is a new issue. I think it has been exacerbated, and I think it's grown, and I think that I think it's a bigger issue now than maybe it was 10 years ago, but I don't think it's new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then Wayne, if you kind of wanted to chime in, I guess I'm just curious if there's any maybe particular sector or anything that's more susceptible to cybercrime in supply chain, or if it's something that maybe applies to everyone. I mean, I guess when I think of supply chain cybercrime, I always think of like defense contractors or the NSA opening mail and installing malware, things like that. I don't know if you really have any kind of thoughts on if there's anything where it's more or less.
So we've had the honor and privilege to work with both the commercial sector as well as the defense sector. And it kind of changes your perspective on the drivers in the two markets are very different. Looking at cybercrime from more of like a retail perspective, if you look at how competitive the retail environment is and what the margins are, it's driving them to have cheaper and flatter implementations. And what they do is they do find the weakest link in the chain. Even if you have a solid defense, you have somebody who's providing external services to you, like a vendor who's managing your air conditioning or something like that, and it opens the door for them to get in and get to your POS systems, which are the holy grail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if there's sort of a maybe like typical case or something for supply chain cybercrime, or if it's so varied that you really can't say anything like that. Brian, do you think there's anything?
No, actually, I think they're varied. Actually, I was reading about the there was a hack on Snapchat where videos or pictures and so forth that were going through Snapchat were apparently being shared, and it turned out it wasn't Snapchat that actually got hacked, but it was a third-party application on top of Snapchat that really got hacked, and their servers got hacked, and that's where the photos came from. So there's even like supply chains for non-traditional, what I would call supply chain, like these third-party apps that are on top of Dropbox or on top of Snapchat, they get hacked. So Snapchat, once again, may have the bulletproof servers, but if there's APIs and users are allowing third-party apps access to that data, those apps end up being somewhat of a supply chain for your digital content. So that to me is kind of one extreme opposite of some of these more traditional supply chains that you think about, like in industry and aerospace and so forth like that.
Yeah, Jason, I'm wondering maybe if you could kind of talk about that too, just like maybe the different industry sectors, like if you think there's one in particular that kind of pops out when it comes to supply chain cybercrime.
I mean, for me, I think we're just starting to see the data roll in or be collected and roll in and be analyzed on how much there is. I mean, it's easy to say right now that industries like healthcare and retail have a lot of supply chain cybercrime, but people are just now starting to take notice. Oh my God, these people, these 1,200 people have access to my network. It's just now starting to be reported, and what you're going to see is a whole lot of that start to come out. Everything from typical definition of supply chain, like you have a supplier who has access to your network, to things like Brian's talking about, where there are third-party applications being built on top of your stuff that you don't have any insight into. They use your APIs, they adhere to your terms of service, but beyond that, you don't know what they're doing. And I think it's also, we're not very far away from seeing supply chain cybercrime start to actually affect the cybersecurity industry. There's a lot of tools that OEM other tools. There's things that are designed to protect you that are going to start surfacing holes and back doors. So it's going to get worse, and supply chain cybercrime is just now starting to be paid attention to.
Mm-hmm. We have one question out there from Eric. He says, it seems like companies can hardly monitor and control their own internal security, so how can they gain real insight into other organizations? And that question kind of, we were on Twitter earlier, and there was a tweet, I forget exactly what it said, but it was basically saying that most organizations can't even name all the members that are in their supply chain. So I guess, now that we kind of know what the supply chain is, Wayne, maybe if you could sort of chime in, how do people go about getting security from that?
So I've had the opportunity to talk with a lot of people that have been involved in either incident response or the people trying to defend the networks that have been hit recently in the commercial sector. And what you're seeing is a shift from the traditional defend everything to more of a identify the key terrain within your network and defend that. I agree with the assessment that just going to a local retail store and seeing the number of vendors that are baked into their ecosystem is alarming. But when you see also the fact that retailers, one retailer recently that had an incident, 600 plus alerts within a 4-day period that were ignored. In some cases, they're receiving the alerts, they're just not responding to them. If you take more of that key terrain approach to defending your network instead of trying to defend things that really aren't worth defending, there's a higher probability of protecting that data and not having a significant data breach.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask a question of Wayne?
Oh, cross-direct.
Is that good?
Awesome. That's good.
You brought up a good point, one that's important to me. Like with the retailer that got the 600 alerts, is the retailer expected to be able to deal with 600 alerts a day and have the humans there that can understand those and do something with them? Do you think that's a reasonable expectation?
I really believe, I've worked with Jason for a long time, and he's taught me a few things. That if you look at the solutions that are being rolled out now and that are being envisioned, you have to move more toward the autonomic solution. What we have found is we are suffering from a significant layer 8 problem. It's the person in front of the keyboard who receives the information who either A, does not follow protocol, B, does not have a protocol, or C, just decides not to do it, that often is at the epicenter of a major data breach. They saw something, they had procedure, they didn't make the right decision.
Maybe because they weren't able to, right? I mean, I totally agree with you. Autonomic or more automated solutions to help them understand of the 600 alerts, which are the ones that are more important. would be helpful, because there's not enough humans, I feel, to go around. And like you said, that the data is there, and not every alert is created equal. And so I'm with you, Paul. That's a good answer. Thank you.
No, I totally agree. I just want to add one thing to the conversation, because I think it's going to a good area for discussion, which is there's kind of a big missing piece, which is the triage piece, right? The business operations, the enterprises that are here, they don't have any sort of higher level way to sort of say this is more important or not, meaning to help that analyst. There aren't enough analysts to go around. There aren't enough humans to go around. So kind of meeting automated systems in the middle and being able to do better triage really speaks to the lack of organization in that level, meaning businesses aren't doing risk intelligence. And I always kind of define risk intelligence as, matrixing in the threats that are out there with your own particular vulnerabilities, your own particular IT infrastructures, your own particular customers, partners, supply chain, whatever, and then deciding from there, or being able to decide via analysis what's more important to you, right? Because you can't. I mean, Brian brings up a good point, and I think the subtext there is it's impossible to respond to all those alerts, but knowing which ones are more important for your business, for your customers, is probably one of the big areas that's kind of missing. People kind of rush very quickly to, oh, it's a technical problem, and it really isn't. It's more of an organizational problem in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's great points, Jason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess before we get too much into sort of the specifics, it'd be kind of nice to just sort of back up and maybe give some examples of supply chain cybercrime. I started covering cybersecurity, I guess, right before the Edward Snowden thing happened. So, if you look at the two biggest stories of 2013, with Edward Snowden and with Target, those are both kind of vendor or supply chain kind of issues. But I'm wondering, maybe, like, when you guys think of supply chain cybercrime, I mean, is there, like, what comes to your mind? Do you have any sort of examples for people out there? Maybe Jason, if you want to start.
Yeah, you've called out some of the big ones. But obviously there's a lot more to it. It's a very broad and deep problem domain. Your healthcare provider, your local 6 dental office chain is using people to process payments, to process insurance claims, to handle your data, to store your data. They're outsourcing it to local companies at times. Move a little bit more towards scarier type things. The community health systems breach that's in the news the last year. $150, $200 million. It's still not over yet. There's going to be a lot of litigation, a lot of class action lawsuits already being filed. That was a breach made possible, at least we think so right now, by Heartbleed, right? A pretty sophisticated breach where they got in, they got a password, and they were able to get further into the network. And everybody knows if you can get into the network, you can always get further. It's that first step that's the problem. Yet most people don't think of how susceptible things very near to them, close proximity, are. Their doctors, their local restaurants, their local, what have you. Phishing attacks, spear phishing attacks. These things let people into the network really, really quickly. And once you're in, things like point of sale systems where they can take more, more valuable things and take more hurtful things are very easy to do at that point. And if you haven't looked around, think about it the next time you go out and you go to the gas station or you go to a local restaurant. All these people have point of sale systems that they're outsourcing to someone. In the local area, the people are doing installation, support, so on and so forth. There's literally thousands of these companies that install these systems, and you don't really think about it. There's an assumption that it's safe, whereas it doesn't take a very sophisticated approach like the Heartbleed exploit in the community health systems cause all this damage and lose millions of records. You could be handing over your records right now just because locally the local restaurant you ate at every week has used a point of sale provider that isn't very security aware, and frankly, it's not entirely their fault nowadays. There's such a new frontier here with things like this point of sale cybercrime.
Mm-hmm.
If we could take a brief departure from that, also another driver that's not necessarily obvious to people is in retail, the drive for having data as precursors for data science related activities. All of the clickstream analytics, and what we found in a couple of retailers without naming names is they were taking credit card data and then running analytics against it as part of like their clickstream analytic flow. What was the average household income associated with the person owning the credit card and the credit card limit, and how do I characterize that during the day? So they were taking track 1 and track 2 data from credit cards, which wasn't supposed to be persisted, and they were storing it in a undefended cluster.
Yeah, we actually have a question out there kind of relating to what we're talking about. Matt, he says, as with Jimmy John's, some stores are being compromised through third-party POS vendors. Should these stores utilize third-party vendors or take more ownership of their own systems?
Yeah, no, let me take a first stab at that. I mean, I think one of the things that retailers need to do is start holding these people more accountable, and a lot of that's going to come in the contracts and in the the policies that they put forth for signing up for these third-party point of sale device manufacturers, owners, whatever service they're using to maintain them. So I think it has to start there, and you need to hold them accountable. So I'll start the conversation with that.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I completely agree. I also think that people are, as I kind of alluded to earlier, people are going to have to start knowing what's on their own baseline. I mean, if you have a particular point of sale vendor you're outsourcing to, they're using a particular technology, a particular resold type of terminal. You're going to have to start becoming more aware of what's actually going on, not just assuming that oh, they know what they're doing, they installed it or what have you. Tracking what the technology is, what's made up inside that point of sale, technology. Is there a web server in there? Is that web server being hacked, last week? So on and so forth. People don't really know. Well, I'll say this: the intelligence gathering, the data analysis required of policing your own supply chain, which is virtually non-existent except in the very largest enterprises today, is going to have to trickle down and become, part of this meet in the middle thing, like Brian's talking about. Holding these people accountable, asking the questions, tracking what they're doing, tracking what they're using. It's going to be, unfortunately, it's going to become a more diligence is going to become a more watchword day in, day out.
And for the love of God, just having antivirus on these things is not enough. So that I don't want to hear another retailer, oh, we had AV on it. That's just clearly not enough.
Yeah, and it's not going to be enough to defend them in court either. So it's going to be an interesting next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, if you look at some of the stuff with the most recent POS hits, what you find is that, first of all, the POSs were very, very lightweight, lightly defended devices. I mean, in one case, it was running Windows CE, which, yeah, a little bit of a head scratcher on that one. Second, when you walk into a store and you use, to Jason's point, what is baked into the ecosystem that provides me this wondrous card swipe here? And then when I swipe my card there and it goes off to one of these processors, first of all, what do they do with it? How do they protect it? And most critical, and no one ever asks this question, how long will they persist that data? Because in some cases, they're holding onto the data, the processor is holding onto the data and doing data mining activity on it in unprotected stores.
Yeah, I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts on, sort of where that responsibility lies, because a few people I've talked to have sort of made the point that, the enterprise levels, need to hold the small businesses accountable, and that seems to make sense. Because I just imagine, as a small business, maybe there's only a few people who own it, or maybe there's 50. They really don't have the resources to maybe go out and investigate all those kind of things that you guys are talking about. So, I don't know, is that something that you guys would all agree with, that it's more like the enterprises sort of need to bring the small businesses up, or do you think it falls more directly on the small businesses that are getting breached? I don't know, Brian, if you have a thought on that.
Yeah, I have to think on that. I mean, I think that you see a lot of it on the onus of the small business, and there needs to be something there to help them. I don't know if that's a third party. I don't think you can expect the enterprise to pay for it. I think the small business needs to, but there needs to be something there that is enabling that small business, because they're not going to have the expertise. So I don't know. That's my thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jason, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think we're all talking about a problem that's easily identified, right? We can describe it and name it and go into detail about it. And the sad, sad. I don't know, put a value on it, but the truth of it is that it's everybody's responsibility. I mean, part of the reason that we're having all this insecurity, if you will, is because of coding standards going back 10, 20, 30 years and approaches for that. And so it's going to end up being everybody's responsibility, down to the small business owner, the large business owner that's using them as a supplier, the consumer themselves. I mean, over the next decade or so, you're going to there's no easy solution. There's no, oh, okay, well, here you go. We're going to add these 4 or 5 things to our baseline, and everybody's going to be safer. It's kind of like the model that I always use is sort of like infectious disease, right? 100 years ago, people were not as readily capable of defending themselves from even, infection of common colds. We didn't have antibacterial gels. We knew that, you don't go around other people when you're sick. These things kind of had to trickle into our, common, shared consciousness. And so a lot of this security stuff is going to have to go the same path. And unfortunately, as Brian said, there's going to be advances, third-party products. There's going to be education. There's going to be training. There's just going to be a good old-fashioned, I got my hand burned, I'm not putting it back on the stove again. So it's kind of all going to add up over the next decade or so to help us all become more secure. But talking about it in terms of a silver bullet is unfruitful. So.
Yeah, I mean, to Jason's point, I think there have to be, so adding on to what Jason and Brian both talked about, I think there also need to be minimum guidelines for, how that data is handled, how that data is processed, and, how it is controlled. If you look at, I got a chance to play with a lot of the different POS systems, and I was amazed at how, first of all, the size of the companies that were producing these devices. These were, a lot of mom and pop businesses of 20 or 30 people. And I saw some solutions that were very advanced, and then I saw some that were very primitive. And, it's amazing how little the people who purchase those devices and utilize those services know about what goes into it or what's done with the data that's being processed by that card swipe or POS system.
Yeah, to Wayne's point, that's kind of frightening to me, is most of the folks who are engaging in transactions, taking your money for some good or service, they don't really know what happens either before or after. They don't know where it goes. They don't even think about data storage or anything else. And so what you're going to see being required is some sort of, as Wayne alludes to, some kind of CDC type entity that says, hey, for God's sakes, wash your hands. Here's what happens, with the data you're taking, and here's your responsibility in the supply chain. Again, that's going to take a long time. It's not sexy, it's not flashy, but these mom type rules, as I refer to them, are things that are going to have to be the first step. Fundamentals.
Yeah, I mean, so being ignorant's not going to be an excuse, right? To your point, and like you said, Jason, I think you said it well. Is we've got thousands of years of learning how to live with diseases and how to walk down a street safely. This whole internet and this digital age is relatively new. We've got to build our collective wisdom, and unfortunately, it's going to be off of some people making some dumb choices, maybe some ignorant choices. And we just, as an industry, need to figure out how we can speed the process up of learning.
Right, really good point. And to continue that, simple tools, right? Simple, approachable levers and buttons. The departure from sophistication that has been kind of the hallmark of the last 10 years of cybersecurity tools. And you don't need to pay attention to that. We got it. Or deep packet this or what have you. I mean, we're talking about levers and buttons that we're going to need for these folks to come along with. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I was kind of wondering about. Especially over at HackSurfer, we always talk about making cybersecurity simple and trying to come up with don't think about all the complex stuff. Just start with the basics. I guess when I think of supply chain cybercrime, I always think in my head that it's more advanced. I think like advanced persistent threats and things like that. So I'm wondering, for someone who's trying to defend against this supply chain stuff, is there still the simple basic rules that can sort of help a lot of this from happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some blocking and tackling that I still see people not doing that can help. Meaning, so they don't have to run really advanced special plays to defend here. And I also don't necessarily call them advanced persistent threats. I mean, some of these attacks are pretty straightforward. It's just once again, I mean, some people think their defense is their antivirus product. And for malware today, that AV is not enough. So I do think some basics, just basics alone, can go a long way for a lot of companies and for a lot of these places. Because to Jason's point, a lot of these, they're just completely not even worried about what's in this black box, and not realizing what's in that black box could kill them or destroy their quarter or their business, what have you. So.
Yeah, I blame the DVR, or actually the VCR or the Betamax. I mean, everybody's gotten so used to technology solving the problem. I want to record this show. I just push a button and it does it. or I don't even push a button and it just records what it thinks I want. And so what you've got is a big ecosystem of small, medium, large businesses, commercial enterprises that feel like technology should be able to solve the problem, and everybody's kind of realizing that they have a personal responsibility, accountability, obligation in this to figure out how to do security outside of the tools that they're employing. Like, to Brian's point, antivirus, just fire and forget. I'm protected. It's kind of like, well, I locked the front door, so I shouldn't be good. And then when somebody comes in and robs you blind, you're like, well, it's the lockmaker's fault. It's not the lockmaker's fault. You're ignoring it, this thirst for convenience and indulging yourself in the convenience that's offered by technical solutions is really it's kind of scary. That's scarier to me than the specific cybercrime issue. It's just sort of our attitude toward, especially my kids. I mean, if it's not an app and they can't click on it, or order something remotely and have it delivered to their door, they're really upset by that, and I'm going to fix that though. But that scares me a whole lot more than specific cybercrime. So.
Yeah, looking at the retail space and some of the DoD and government space, it's amazing when you sit down with people who are defending networks and say, what is the key terrain within your network? What is stored on your network that people would be interested in? And the puzzled looks that you get about, no, I mean, I get signatures that tell me to look over here. No. If somebody were to come in, what are they looking for? And whether, looking across probably, I would say, 6 different retailers that I got a chance to talk to in the wake of Target, was, okay, what is the key terrain within your store? What are the elements, they would go after, and what have you done to mitigate that? And, puzzled looks and I'm not sure where you're going with that. Well, that in and of itself is, once again, back to kind of a blocking and tackling kind of issue. What would they come for? More disturbing was kind of going into do you have cyber hygiene data? Do you have data that will show us what the attack surface of your network looks like? How vulnerable are you? Do you know what your vulnerabilities are? And, once again, a lot of puzzled look. That's kind of in its infancy. If they follow the basics, they would foil many of the attacks. And we just haven't gotten there yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have another question out there from Eric, kind of going along, I guess, technological advances that can help. He's talking about the chip and pin payment systems. There's already criticism mounting that we're spending a lot to improve a broken system in a different way. Is it worth the middle step, or should we just move to something else entirely? You guys kind of have any thoughts on the chip and pin system, if that's going to help? Maybe Jason, if you want to start.
I mean, the way I'd answer that question is I think that we're constantly evolving. I think that some other system, some other mechanism, probably not driven by these cybercrime breaches, is going to end up being the solution for paying by credit card, right? It's going to be something that is still coming down the pike. Apple Pay is a step in that direction. Tokenization, that kind of thing. We're probably still looking at it like, oh, that's a really cool innovation. Whereas in 3 years we'll look back and be like, why were we doing that at all? I mean, now we have this. So I think it's sort of a intermediate step. It's kind of one of those. Remember those big posters from when you were a kid in elementary school about evolution, and you see the branches and the ones that died off. I mean, the chip and pin stuff probably isn't the ultimate solution. It probably won't be. So that's generally my thought on that.
Brian, do you have any kind of thoughts about that?
No, I really like Jason's analogy on the branches that die off. I mean, I think chip and pin is definitely an improvement, and there's enough data out there to show that it is more, it is safer, but it's not, it's not a holy grail, and it's probably not, where we end up. What I can't tell you is I don't know how much money is being spent today to move to chip and pin. That's not something I track, and what have you. I do think that when I look at Apple Pay and tokenization and some of the other digital ways of paying for things, I think there are ways that we could do that more secure, and it's going to take some time to get there.
Yeah, and Wayne, you had mentioned that you'd kind of spoke with a few different retailers recently. I'm wondering if any of those conversations had anything about chip and pin in?
Yeah, I mean, talking to different retailers, both medium and larger, it was kind of viewed as a holy grail. They said that it would address many of the items that were identified in some of the major hacking, outbriefs from last year. I think it's part of a next generation solution, but to Jason's point, I think there has to be a fundamental ground-up reevaluation of how we're doing this.
Yeah, and to Wayne's last point, on the whole, as far as cybercrime in business goes, and we're talking about supply chain cybercrime, I think I mentioned earlier, I mean, a lot of these big companies don't even know who all their suppliers are, or what service they're providing, or what account accesses they have, or what API accesses they have. And so business is really, really good at putting a product in the marketplace, right? Studying the demographics, studying market intelligence, knowing, making decisions as it goes along as to what they offer and don't offer based on what the public wants or their audience wants. I think that kind of analysis has to start being applied to cyber solutions at a higher level, not just sort of rushing to a firewall purchase or rushing to this signature technology purchase or whatever, but more of a, okay, what are we getting hit by? What's hurting us? How is it hurting our customers? Again, business is really, really good at putting products in the marketplace, and I think if we start to turn that kind of approach on cybercrime, you're going to see we're talking about chip and pin specifically, but you're going to see evolution of where we end up and where we keep going to is going to fall out of that approach. And ultimately, that's, in my opinion, that's what's going to save us is, industry is going to save itself by doing what it does really well, just in an area that they don't typically apply it in.
That's a good point, Jason. I mean, just a case study or an example, if you will. So one of my previous jobs worked on DLP products. They're looking for data leakage protection, and the biggest obstacle that you always had in a DLP product is you go into an enterprise and to deploy it, and the problem was that enterprise didn't actually know where their data was supposed to be going or where it was going, and they didn't know which of those places it was going was actually correct or not. It speaks to this problem. They don't know who all their partners were, who they were supposed to be sharing data with, and so the first 6 months of any DLP deployment was really a mapping out of their data ecosystem of where data was supposed to be going, and then determining was that the right place or not. And so forth. So that's an excellent example of that, illustrating that point.
Yeah, cyber analytics are going to end up being more often than not cyber related. Meaning, who are your suppliers? Where are the ins and outs? And people, we don't do that very well right now. We just assume that, again, tools are going to save us, and unfortunately, we're getting a hard lesson. But great point. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious how you feel overall, different businesses are sort of doing on this front. Because, listening to you guys' responses, it seems like, well, businesses don't even know what data they should be protecting. They don't know where their data is getting sent. They don't know who their partners are. I mean, is there anyone who's maybe doing good things or doing it right?
Yeah, I mean, let me say, I talk about the ones that don't, and because there's a plethora of those, unfortunately. But there are companies I think do a really good job. I'm not going to mention their name. I know that there's some that actually do a really good job. And some of it starts with a chief risk officer understanding what the business does, understanding what the risks are to that business, and prioritizing those risks and mitigations to those risks throughout the entire organization. I mean, so there's a lot of we could do a whole session probably just on best practices for the companies that are doing it well. The problem is there's a lot that aren't. And I think the three of the panelists here, we get called to talk to a lot of those guys, and it seems like an endless job right now. It's a deluge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and all those people, Brian, that you mentioned that you didn't mention by name, are probably, you can look at each and every one of them, and in every case, these are people who are at the highest level, what I call paying attention to the problem. They're funding it. They have someone looking over it. It's their job every day. And in a lot of cases, you don't see that. I mean, honestly, with even some of the biggest companies, they're kind of like, well, we buy a lot of stuff and we've hired a bunch of people, but they don't feel like it's a valuable part of their overall business operation, and so they don't pay attention to it. It's an SEP, as Douglas Adams used to say, as somebody else's problem. And so in every one of those cases where somebody's doing a really good job, it's a focus, it's an emphasis, and fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it. It's going to become an emphasis all the way down to small business, in the next decade or so, because people are losing everything to these problems, and right now the advantage is it's sort of chaos out there. I mean, everything's low-hanging fruit for the most part for the criminals, and until we start emphasizing it, like I said, and like you alluded to with the examples of companies doing it well, until people start actually doing it well, it probably won't change.
Yeah, what you're seeing in large measure is you're seeing, so if you look at all the retail hits that have occurred over, say, the last 24 months, it's amazing how little variability there is in the playbook. They have found a set of plays that are highly effective. And you see, the spear phishing, which opens the door for me to drop something in, and I do some internal discovery, and I deploy something. It's amazing. And you see this over and over again in the retail space. I must say, the medium-sized companies in the retail space are doing a better job than the big boys are, which is kind of interesting. They're paying more attention. If you go into an organization and they have a CISO, a good CISO, what I found is they seem to get the severity and significance of the problem. If you go into the organization and security is an IT problem, yeah, you're probably going to have a long day. That's not going to work out very well.
That's a good point.
The center of balance in the organization about who is responsible. See, the CISO knows he's going to get fired. The IT guy is going to blame it on somebody else and, perpetuate the problem.
Yeah, Brian, I think from your example or how you described your example earlier, blocking and tackling, I assume you're probably a football fan like myself. But I'll use that, football kind of as a metaphor for what Wayne's talking about. Teams that do the fundamentals really well, those teams are competitive in every game. They may not win every game, but they focus on sound fundamentals. They have a process for it, and they don't sort of willy-nilly jump. Oh my God, heart bleeds out. Let's throw all of our resources into heart. Understanding what that means and what it means to you, and then just continuing on and doing your job in a really robust process that emphasizes fundamentals. Those companies are going to end up better off than not. And unfortunately, right now, people don't know what that means to do fundamentals. There aren't a lot of well-coached companies out there, I'll put it that way.
It's amazing to see companies seeing other companies and organizations seeing other organizations get hit. And there's not even a morbid curiosity about how did that happen? You know what I mean? They don't look at it as lessons learned that they can apply against their own organization. And then there's my absolute favorite. I've met a few of these. Let's throw our hands up in the air if the problem is too hard. And it's like, if you have a million customers out there, you can't just throw your hands up and say, they're going to get in no matter what. You have to make them work for it.
Yeah, Matt has a question out here. He says, it sounds like one of the biggest problems in cybersecurity is ignorance. Why do we not have more experts like you guys dealing with these problems? Is it just an education problem, or is it a resource problem, or is it just what do you think kind of behind it?
I think some of this is an experience curve, right? And we've been talking a little bit about this, that we're still going up the experience curve, and we just need to learn. We need to find ways to accelerate up this experience curve. We can't take 1,000 years, just as an example. But yeah, I think there's some of this experience curve that we need to get through on this, and I do think this is an issue, and I think this is part of what I think the different companies that we represent here are focused on. Is there's not enough humans to go around. How can we start helping? They make the humans you do have smarter, quicker, deal with these things, and start to automate, as we were talking about earlier on.
Mm-hmm. And then another question I wanted to ask is, everyone's kind of talking about how you need to know your supply chain and know all the members in there, and kind of, poking fun at these organizations that don't even know who's in their own supply chain. But I'm wondering, even if you do sort of take that activity and, you have dozens of different partners and vendors, it seems like that would be quite an undertaking to kind of realize, to manage the security of all those different entities. So, just on a practical level, if you're trying to manage your supply chain risk, what do you really do?
Well, just a quick answer to that. Businesses spend a lot more time, money, and energy doing things with less payoff every day right now. And knowing, I think the number one takeaway, the first takeaway, is that knowing where your problems are, it is a way that you can kind of look at your enterprise and say, well, I have these risks. At least I can defend the most important ones, or at least I'll put my resources in the area where I can defend the most important ones. You're never going to be able to, I talk about a lot extending the security umbrella out to your supply chain, and you can do that a lot of different ways. And you're never going to be able to completely handle their security for them, but part of the burden is you're going to have to do this kind of thing to learn what you don't know, because what you don't know is hurting you right now. And even if only a few insights fall out of this kind of activity of collecting data about who your suppliers are, what they have access to, what tools and technologies they're using, what roles they have, those kind of things, things are going to jump out at you even from going through that list, even if it's not a comprehensive analytic effort. I would argue that needs to be, but even if it isn't, things are going to fall out of that you're like, oh, man, I didn't know I was exposed there. Have we gotten hit yet? Let's go look over there. And I just think you have to start doing it. It's going to be something that business is going to have to add to their day in, day out processes of knowing where the threat could come from, even from people they trust the most.
I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't. Having talked to some of the retailers and stuff, what I've counseled them on is not all of your suppliers are the problem. I mean, the guy who's doing dry cleaning for you, I could care less. To Jason's point, it's identifying the key terrain that resides outside the kingdom that is attached to you is what's, like in the case of credit card data. Tracking the credit card data from the time it is swiped at the register, where will it go, where will it end, and then how long will it persist there. It's amazing, if you help a customer just walk through that thread, they now have a detailed understanding end to end of what their risk is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the one story that always sticks out in my mind when I think of supply chain cybercrime, and well, maybe it's not technically supply chain, but I think of the story of the I think it was Chinese hackers who, or some kind of, I think it was a state-sponsored thing, but basically they infected a Chinese takeout menu. I don't know if you guys remember that story. So I guess it's kind of a supply chain in terms of supplying your lunch. But when I think of that seems like something that would almost be like impossible to defend, at least from someone like me who's an outsider. I don't really have technical knowledge of how these solutions work. I don't know if you guys really agree if there's anything, for an advanced threat like that businesses can do to stop things like that, or if that's something that's really difficult. Brian, if you want to.
Well, once again, employee training is critical. You're never gonna solve everybody, but especially engineers, for example, which I manage teams of. I do a lot of training with them. Don't assume just because they're technical that they're savvy. But I think employee training is critical, and I just happened to present at one of our customers' user internal kind of tech risk events, and they had a company that goes and does basically fake phishing attacks just to see what percentage of the organization clicks on the links and stuff. And I thought having been able to watch the results for this company and see how the different groups between the executives, middle management, employees, hourly employees versus salaried, it's very interesting dynamics. But to do that regularly is a good example of training, to teach people not to click the links, and what have you. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in that case, Jeff, in the example that you mentioned, where the target had ultimately been the accounts of the executives who were ordering lunch or having their secretaries order lunch for them or what have you. I just mentioned that because a lot of times when people don't take sort of a risk filter view of their enterprise and they're constantly worried about what threats there are. I spoke to a company in the last year that was doing cataloging. They were storing the data that was going in and out of their network, and one of the byproducts, one of the sets of data they were storing was, inside their network, from inside to out, what were people accessing? What URLs were people accessing from inside their network out? But they weren't going through those URLs and saying, let's see if there's any bad stuff. Let's scan these URLs every day and see if there's malware out there. And as it turned out, after they started doing it, it was just rife with malware that they could stop. But people don't take this risk-centric view of it and say, from what you're describing, it sounds like people think, well, that's an awful lot of work. Well, it is an awful lot of work. But if you don't really take sort of a risk-centric view of what can hurt me and then work from there, it helps you organize the way you do things and the labor. So I was in the Army a long time, and constantly, as Wayne was as well, and heard, work smarter, not harder. And when people take this risk-centric view of the things that can hurt them, it kind of eliminates a lot of work that you would have to do. Well, I don't have to do that because that's not a risk for me. And whereas right now everybody's got it flipped around, and they're saying, well, there's 8 million threats out there. Okay, yeah, but only 12 of them really apply to you in any serious way, and they keep winnowing it down further and further. But nobody's doing that right now. There isn't a risk mindset in business, as Brian reported earlier. The chief risk officer is something people would say, is there such a thing? You know, I mean, most people don't know that. So I just want to point that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have one last question I wanted to quick ask that someone put in the Q&A section. Basically, the question is, I read a poll indicating consumers are more than likely going to stay away from retail stores that had been breached this holiday season. What is your opinion about the lasting effects a breach can have on a company?
Are they going to stay home? I mean, the one thing that consumers really need to be aware of is the fact that it's an iceberg. You see a small part above the water and 90% is below the water. Last year with Target, yes, you heard Target getting just hammered in the news, but there were another 5 or 6 retailers, big ones, sitting behind them that their names were never mentioned. There have been ones that have been hit this year that have not been mentioned. If you go with just the names you know, rest assured that the businesses that you're going into have been hit in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, to Wayne's point, are you going to stay home, not go shopping at all? If you want to steer clear of the ones that have been attacked, you know, what are your options going to be? You know, what I tell people, and my mom and dad and my friends as an example is, you know, just be careful and watch your credit card bill. You know, do all the things that make sense. You know, this holiday season, you know, we see at Damballa an increase in point of sale malware. You know, through what we're seeing. You know, so you just that's what's out there. Just watch your credit card bills. I do think you need to hold the retailers accountable so that they're looking at doing this smarter. I really like Jason's point. You know, the retailers need to be looking at this risk and doing more about it than I think they have. And so.
Yeah, we have one other question that just came in. I thought I'd ask quick. From Richard, he says, at the end of the day, cost versus reward seems to be a common denominator with organizations not security focused. What other options are available or can be driven home, so to speak, in order for the idea of a security development lifecycle to be taken? I don't know, Jason, if you got that question, can you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we could talk for a long time about that. I mean, I think that you could argue that the most security-minded enterprises out there are financial. You know, the banking industry, you know, payment processing, so on and so forth, and they really look at it in terms of cost versus reward. And the reason they don't move forward with a lot of things is it's too expensive or it's inconvenient to their customers or so on and so forth. And so right now it becomes kind of a tax that they're willing to pay. Whereas I think a lot of businesses, if they started looking at it from this kind of risk mindset of, you know, there are simple, fundamental things I can do to reduce my risk profile, and look at it that way, which in turn, you know, trickles down to your customers. It helps you grow your business. It helps you grow your reputation and brand. And there are simple things you can do. And I think if people start looking at it in terms of, all right, what simple things am I not doing to reduce my risk? Again, I'm going to just keep coming back to it. I think it's all a risk reduction exercise. In terms of this cost versus reward way that Richard's painted it. And to me, I think that's the way everybody's going to have to start looking at it, is risk reduction, which businesses do a great job of, but they aren't applying it yet to cybercrime and cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you look at having, you know, I've had a chance to talk to some of the security professionals that have been involved in some of the incidents over the last couple of years, and it's amazing because, yeah, I hear the same thing about the cost trade-offs, but then you talk about the long-term damage to your brand, to your positioning in the market, your stock price, your insurance cost, and, you know, without naming names, I mean, I've shown several customers a model of this is what you would pay. You know, you can pay $1 million this year to reasonably secure your network end to end, or you could pay 15 or 20 trying to defend yourself in court, deal with your insurance costs, and oh, by the way, you're going to get slammed in the news every day. So.
Yeah, my end cap on this is that, you know, I think that the benchmarks that companies use today to measure how much they spend on IT and security are going to have to change, and I think in some cases they already are. You know, J.P. Morgan Chase was in the news. Jamie Dimon, the CEO there, said, "Hey, we spent $250 million on security today. We're going to double that over the next 5 years." You know, I'm looking for that to happen across not just the financials, which, as we've pointed out, are already very risk focused and I think are already very sophisticated, these other segments and industries are going to have to follow suit and look at how much they're spending, realizing that it's not enough. And it's not just spend more money, it's also spend it more smartly. So.
Yeah, we're pretty much out of time here. I thought maybe to wrap it up, we could just kind of quickly mention maybe what your companies do and if they're at all related to securing the supply chain, just so people can kind of get a sense of what options are out there. So Brian, I don't know, maybe if you want to quick go first.
Sure. Damballa is a breach detection platform that sits on a network looking for infected devices. And I think the relation we have to this subject is, we look for all devices that attach to a network, and oftentimes the infected devices we find on the network are ones not owned by the company that's bought our product and deployed it, but some third party that's placed a photo kiosk in a store or some other contractor that's come on site. So.
Yeah, and Jason, you want to tell us a little bit?
Yeah, so SurfWatch Labs is really a cyber event analytics company. We're focused on bringing business intelligence to cyber event data. And it sounds simple, but basically, turning the same sort of microscope and lens and analysis that you would use for sales data or product development or so on and so forth into your own cyber defense by looking at what's you're at risk of, what other companies in your sector are at risk of, what other sectors are at risk of, and doing that every day, pretty much continuously, and benefiting from very simple key performance indicator type analysis, not complex stuff. We're not talking about advanced mathematic, calculus here. Simple KPI stuff. Sales over the last quarter, regression to the mean type stuff. And so that's what we do, and hopefully to educate companies on being safer themselves by inspecting their own processes.
Yeah. Then Wayne, if you want to tell us a little bit about release to innovations.
Well, actually, it's cooler to talk about Jason's stuff. Jason's stuff's probably a lot more. I listen to the other two; they're doing a lot more exciting things. So, Release 2 innovation is taking a very different. The reason to name a Release 2 is we're taking a very different look at cybersecurity. We're treating it more of a big data problem. So, network forensic analytics, and in the area of cybersecurity, characterization of throughput, and then also emergency response analytics as well. So.
All right. Well, thank you guys for taking the time. We appreciate it. And thanks everyone out there for watching. We'll do another one of these in about another month or so.
It's great talking to you guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.